The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to another LavaCon webinar series. Today we have Peter Conrad with Do More by Doing Less. Peter, are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
The floor is all yours.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Conrad, and I'm a technical writer at Salesforce. I've been here for about 4.5 years, and I mostly focus on big data. I have been a tech writer for about 20 years with kind of a variety of experience in consumer-facing and developer-facing documentation in both hardware and software environments. And the talk I'd like to give today is called Do More by Doing Less. It's about how to focus the impact of your work to kind of get the most bang for your buck. And I'm going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end in case anybody has any questions. So without further ado, I'd like to start with a story about doing more by doing more. Some of you will recognize that this is a screenshot from a Confluence page, intentionally blurred. A few years ago, I was leading a documentation team. We had a very nice Confluence site, but we didn't know how we were doing because we weren't really getting any customer feedback. So we added a customer feedback form. You can see that we put a link at the bottom of the screen there. And when you click the link, you get this little feedback form where you can indicate how helpful the page is, leave comments, and leave an email if you're willing to be contacted about your feedback. The output from the form goes to a place online where I was able to download it into a spreadsheet. And so we started getting lots of feedback, and we were able to process it and react to it and make improvements to pages. And everybody lived happily ever after. Well, not really. What should have happened was that the docs got better, customers were happier, and the team should have been happier, in fact, because management is happy, customers are happy, docs are better, right? What actually happened was that I kind of drowned my team in busy work that could never be completed. We got so much feedback that there was no end to it, and the team was just absolutely miserable. The doc didn't improve. Everybody was unhappy. All this wasted effort, and for what? Lots of work. The customers didn't get what they needed. There was no really substantial information added to the docs, just a big waste of time. So let's talk about avoiding that by doing less. This is not going to be about don't use adverbs or zen of writing or avoid the passive voice. It's a little bit about learn to say no, and busyness is not important. But mostly it's a plan for how tech writers on your team can specifically focus efforts where they will achieve the most impact. So the goals, why we do this, we want better results and higher quality, of course. We want a better customer experience. We want more victories for the people who are working on your team. More meaningful work is a way to get there. We want you to be in control of the customer experience instead of playing catch up. And more free time is important, not just for recharging so that you can work better, but also for playing, which is where innovation comes from, and to work on other problems so you can improve things and maybe get some of those nice to haves done. By the way, the word goals is going to be really important. This is kind of foreshadowing. There are several kinds of goals: customer goals, your goals, and your other stakeholders' goals, of course. So, spoiler alert, the impact zone, as I'm going to call it, is the intersection of the right information at the right time. And this is what I'm going to show you how to find. This is the work that helps your customers achieve their goals. They don't yet know what tasks to do. They don't know why or how to do anything. They don't need an overview or reference right now. They need to know how to do something that they wanted to do. They have something that they want to accomplish, and you need to get them there. So impact is about doing the important things and saying no to the other things. So how do you determine when your customers need to know something? Well, the audience changes over time. Each person starts out knowing very little about your product or service and then gains knowledge over time as they use it, hopefully becoming an expert user. At various points along the way, the user looks to you for information. And these are the points where you have the opportunity. The idea is to give the right piece of information at the specific moment that the customer has a need. Of course, you're not a mind reader, and not all customers are the same. So the impact zone is not going to be the same for everyone or for every set of documentation, but we know something about the customer journey and where we are likely to do the most good. So that's what we will look at next. And the idea is anything other than the right info at the right time is not useful. So how do you find out what the customer needs to know at any given time? Let's start by looking at the structure of a few different types of documentation. So I looked at the docs for my camera. I'm still kind of old school. I have a standalone camera. And the table of contents shows what you might expect: a small amount of overview information, then the basics of how to use the camera, and then a gradual transition to reference sections like troubleshooting and settings, specifications, things like that. My car manual is similar. There's a little bit of overview, then some basic how-to information, and then more detailed reference material, specifications, capacities, and so on. One case that is a little bit different and somewhat more variable is API doc. So there might be a bit more overview. There may or may not be how-to information like cookbooks or tutorials, and there might be a large amount of reference. Sometimes the how-to point is most important, and sometimes the reference sections are really the bread and butter of this type of documentation. It really depends on your specific case. All these pieces of documentation can be grouped into three categories: what it is, how to use it, and stuff you forget and have to look up. Those of you who practice DITA will immediately recognize that these correspond roughly to concept, task, and reference topic types. I'm going to add a fourth type here, the goal. A task is not important by itself. The customer doesn't come to the documentation with a task in mind, but with a goal. The customer is looking for the task that will accomplish that goal. When the customer looks for the task, how to replace toner, they're actually trying to accomplish a higher goal of, I just want to print my screenplay. They don't come in thinking about toner or error codes or something like that. They come in with something they want to do, and your thing is going to help them do it. The customers only care about the information that supports their goals. This is how you figure out what the customer wants to know. Understand their goals and document the information that supports those goals. So, how do you start to get a rough shape of the impact zone? When you start with the three categories, here are some kinds of documents that fall into them. And this shouldn't have any surprises, really, for anyone. You can see that the docs at the top, overview, for example, are more general. Each doc in the reference area is smaller and has to cover more specific information. So at the bottom, you kind of have a larger number of more specific docs, and at the top you have a smaller number of more general docs. And the task-oriented docs fall somewhere in between. So you get a shape like this, with potentially a large number of reference docs supporting a body of how-to content with a smaller set of overview docs on the top. The user starts out reading the overview material when they're totally naive and uninitiated. They learn to be a competent user by reading the how-to information, and then as they become an expert, they just look things up in the reference sections occasionally. This is important because reading something takes longer than looking something up. That means the user devotes more time to the overview material than to the reference material. In some ways, from a time point of view, any specific reference topic is less important than it might seem. The whole body of reference might be important, but each piece of that area in the docs is pretty small, used fairly infrequently, and not given a lot of time investment by the reader. So when we overlay the reader's time spent on the docs, it looks like this: a lot of time at the top and progressively less time as they learn more. So where have we seen this shape before? This is, of course, the impact zone. So this is how we find the bulk of the right information at the right time. That doesn't mean we do no reference and no overview. It does mean that we need to find cheaper ways to cover what reference is needed to maximize the attention we give to the most important information. The how-to information is usually what takes the user from naive to competent. So let's talk about how to connect that to what actual projects you should invest in more deeply. Here is this graph again. The right information at the right time means that we need to know what the user is trying to do at various specific points in time, how to support those goals. This means you need to define your audience, not just in terms of demographics or persona, but hopes and dreams. Who is your user and what do they want? More importantly, how does that change over time? Who is your user as they mature from a newbie to an expert? How do you find out? One way is to ask them. In addition to, if we all know about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. 20% of your effort gets you 80% of your results. The important point here is that we are measuring results not in terms of something like word count, obviously, but impact. I know that this is something you've all seen before, but I wanted to really hit this one pretty hard. Even if something with big impact is hard to do, it is worth it because it provides so much more of a big result. If you focus on the most important parts within the impact zone, you get the results without wasting effort on things that don't matter. So, inside the impact zone, as you might guess, is the 80% of results that you get from the targeted 20% of work. This is the right knowledge at each right time for the customer. Outside the impact zone is the rest, the 20% of impact that takes up most of your time. This is the work that we need to say no to, or at least not yet. Even if you can't completely say no, keep your eye on what your top priority is. In fact, within the impact zone, the how-to area is often the number one within the number one. And you can scooch out your overview and reference work a bit. Although, of course, your mileage may vary. With API doc, reference might actually be very important. So even after you identify the impact zone, you might need to probe deeper and see what your priorities within it are. Okay, so how do you sell no? Management might not like no. So how do you put this plan in place? What you are really selling is radical change in your organization. There are a bunch of books that talk about finding and doing the right one thing, saying no to things that don't support the most important goal, and really focusing on just the one thing that will have the most impact right now. What do we need to say no to so that we can put our effort into the one thing that is important? I recommend all these books for strategies on how to really focus and how to make a case for change. Drop the Ball by Tiffany Dufu talks about her experience as a woman in the workplace and how the pressure to do more instead of less affected her family life as well. So that one is very interesting and is a little bit more narrative than the others. So I recommend that one especially. She also talked about how sometimes part of the problem is a lack of support in the workplace. All these books talk about the Pareto principle in one way or another, and they encourage us to push beyond 80-20 to get to the 20% of the 20%, or even 20% of that. So the question is, Does that mean we can just do 4% and still get most of our work done? Can we put in 0.08% of the effort and have 52% of the impact? Does that mean we can just completely slack off and get most of our work done by magic? Probably not. But identifying the important results we need and focusing our efforts there will pay off in time dividends that let us do more exploration, learning, and refinement of our goals. Think about it like picking stocks. If today's price is the effort required in blue and tomorrow's profit is the potential for impact in green, which stocks would you pick? So we have to take our to-do list, keep in mind the items that will have the most impact, and focus on a very small number of the most important things. Ideally, just the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. The one thing by Gary Keller talks about the difference between a to-do list and a success list. The difference is that a success list is short and targeted only at the highest priorities. So we make sure the to-do list is ranked properly, and here is where it is important to have alignment with your stakeholders. What do the customers want to see, and does your manager agree? Does the product owner agree? Do engineering and marketing agree? If you don't have alignment here, you can't prioritize and you'll get stuck just having to do everything. Once you agree on the priorities, you have to have a cut line. You need to agree with your stakeholders on a simple rule you can apply to any request or to-do item that makes it easy to determine whether it's above or below the line. Then you just don't do anything below the line. So you're working with management and other stakeholders. They are the ones you need to sell this to. Why do we need to change? We're not getting everything done. We don't have time to do the things we need to do. Our efforts are not focused. Therefore, we are letting people down. What do most of our customers need? Ask them who they are. Ask product managers too. What are we selling and why? What are people not able to do? And how do we serve those goals? The rules for determining whether something is a priority or not are very important. Once you agree on clear rules, anyone can make the call on whether to do an item or not. To get your stakeholders on board, you need to appeal to their analytical and emotional intelligence and make the path crystal clear. In the book Switch, Chip and Dan Heath talk about the rider who is analytical, the elephant who seeks immediate gratification, and how to direct them together down a clear path. To accomplish this, you need to set and defend very clear goals, and you need to make the need for change really palpable. Then you need to set rules that define the path to get there. Try putting together a statement like this one that's on the screen. What is the problem? What is the effect of the problem? And what's the smallest, simplest change we can make to solve the problem? It's very important to be able to measure and track not just progress, but impact. So you'll need to get your stakeholders to agree with what success looks like. You can see some typical measures here like case deflections or feedback from customers. It's hard to say how you could actually count screenplays printed, but if you could, that would be a good metric. So that's it, right? Perfect formula for success. But we haven't addressed the not yet. What if you can't close the sale? What if you can't spark this kind of radical change and you can't get your management chain to understand why you need to say no to some things? Or what if your stakeholders agree in principle but won't let you say no to everything you want to? You're trying to focus exclusively on important content that affects the largest number of people, but you get mandatory projects that are important for a few key customers, or regulatory notes that no one will read but might come up in an audit, or little projects that come in at the last minute. The copyright date needs fixing in 14 places on the operations manual, for example. So before you push back on these things, ask yourself, Have you assessed the impact zone correctly? Should it be more about API reference, more about cookbooks? What goals do your customers have? Who are your customers really? Do you know what they want? What about your internal customers? What is the right level of investment in less important work? Is there a cheaper way to invest in more things? Assuming your priorities are correct, you'll need to know just how much there is to do and whether it's even possible. And even if you could get it all done, can you articulate the benefit of focusing on high impact work more? If you don't really have the authority to set your own priorities, you will need to collaborate and build a case rather than just drawing a cut line in the sand. Defend your priority list proactively by getting input from all your stakeholders, knowing their goals as well as the customer's goals, and understanding where there is a deviation. Get all the facts you can and get all the allies you can. If you can get a powerful ally to agree with your view, then you have someone, you have a champion who can fight for you and also guide you. When all that fails, figure out ways to minimize the amount of effort that you need to spend to satisfy your stakeholders. Is there a fallback position where you don't take on all of the work outside the impact zone, but part of it? What is the minimum amount of work you can do that will satisfy the requirements? How can you assess the problems that the other work is solving and maybe solve those problems in other ways? When you're making your counteroffer, in other words, telling your stakeholders what you can get done and what you have to say no to, when you're trying to compromise on that point, it's important to know how much work you really have in relation to your resources. So here, this diagram shows that leftmost 20% square, one of the 5 squares, and it has 80% of the dots that represent effort. So obviously we want to pick up the quick impact of just working on the easy 80% on the right, which is, 4 squares, but it's only 20% of the dots. Obviously that's the impact zone. If we actually have all the resources to do everything and we're getting pushed back against our cut line, there is a case to be made for just doing everything. We would rather take away some effort from the left side and reserve it for exploration and new projects, but if you can't, you can't. If you have half the resources you need for the work, you have twice as much work as you really can do, then you need to budget very carefully when you take on the not yet projects. Analyzing the priorities in the not yet list against what resources you actually have is important. You need to get alignment and turn some of those not yet items into no's, or you'll fail. And the more you have on your plate, the more important that conversation becomes. If you try to do everything in this situation, where you really only have 25% of the resources you need, the work will never stop. You'll lose sight of what actually creates impact, and everyone ends up unhappy. So, assuming you can focus on the areas of great impact, and assuming you can mitigate the time you spend outside those areas, the obvious time to start is when you're starting a new entire doc set, when you can plan which pieces of content will be most important to the largest number of people. Now you can do this with an existing set of documentation as well. Does that mean pruning less valuable content? Sometimes. We all know the paralysis that gets caused by having too many choices. And we all have seen doc sets that contain a lot of irrelevant or old content, or things that people don't really need to know but get hung up on. So ask yourself, what's working right now? How can we scale that up? How can we get rid of the things that don't work? Adding effort to scale up what is working right now is better than trying to fix everything that is not working. So it's better to add more to the good than it is to try to go and get rid of all the bad. So basically, to sum up, ask your customers and stakeholders what they want, do more of that, do less of everything else. With all this in mind, what I should have done all those years ago, I should have worked with my team, management, customer support, and other stakeholders to come up with goals and a rule that would let us set priority ranking and a cut line. I should have had my team address only items that met that rule and nothing that didn't fall under that rule. To sum up everything, 1, do less. Thank you. That's it. So if you have any questions or comments, we've got a few minutes left and I'd be happy to take those questions now. Questions, comments, silly remarks? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been my pleasure to give this webinar today, and I hope that you find it useful.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Make sure to use Team Conrad to get $100 off LavaCon conference tuition, and I hope to see you all next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.